Cloaked in opulence yet lacking in dignity, the British royal family has seen its share of saints and a far greater number of notorious charlatans. This tale isn't woven from threads of noble sacrifice or jubilation. It's stained by the petty ambitions and prideful desires of royals who thrive in scandal. From opportunistic monarchs to stunningly flawed princes, these names certainly won't grace your souvenir tea towels. We are diving into 25 figures, generations of chaos, and not a single sign of remorse. When you belong to royalty, the rules seem to dissolve like mist. Welcome to the exploration of the 25 most infamous figures in British royal history. Before plunging into the chaos woven within the opulent velvet curtains of royal life, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Nothing signifies a delightful evening like delving into centuries of royal folly. While you're engaged, share a comment. Where in the world are you tuning in from? Is it midnight as you delve deeper into the past, or are you escaping responsibility in the afternoon? We are curious about who else is journeying through this royal descent into utter madness. Number 1 on our list is Prince Andrew, Duke of York. If a royal baggage check existed, Andrew would not just come out on top. He'd dominate the entire operation, flipping tables and demanding photo opportunities. Once admired as a promising military figure, Queen Elizabeth II's favoured son has devolved into a narrative of unchecked entitlement and obliviousness. Born as the second son of the Queen and Prince Philip, he started out with the potential to be a respectable royal. He served honourably as a helicopter pilot during the Falklands War, gaining genuine admiration. In his earlier years, tabloids dubbed him Randy Andy, finding charm in his reckless escapades, filled with yacht parties and questionable partners, your classic 1980s royal tapestry. Yet, as time meandered on, the light-heartedness faded, revealing a man seemingly oblivious to the consequences of his actions. The gravity of Andrew's issue stretches beyond the allegations he faces, although they are enough to prompt a collective exhale from Buckingham Palace. What truly stings in the public sphere is his utter failure to convincingly show remorse. The 2019 BBC Newsnight interview was meant to be his lifeline, a moment to resurrect his tarnished image, but it turned out to be a train wreck of surreal excuses that bordered on absurdity. He claimed he couldn't have possibly been at the nightclub where the allegations arose because he was in a Pizza Express in Woking, emphasizing the strangeness of that visit as if it could somehow grant him absolution. Furthermore, he asserted that due to a bizarre wartime stress-related ailment, he could not perspire, a claim that baffled both science and decency. British audiences, typically unruffled by royal oddities, were left blinking in disbelief. The palace, as it is wont to do when confronted with a royal snafu, engaged in strategic retreat, quietly sidelining him from public duties. He subsequently faced the removal of military titles and royal appointments. Although he settled an allegation without admitting guilt, the shadow of scandal remains omnipresent. Tragically ironic is Andrew's unwavering conviction of his own innocence, not legally, perhaps, but on moral grounds. He exudes the aura of a baffled heir who cannot fathom why the world doesn't share his self-image of misunderstood loyalty. This brings us to a pivotal realization. Andrew captures the essence of royal privilege, embodying the stereotype that monarchy creates individuals so insulated that they perceive accountability as an option rather than an obligation. Unlike other fallen royals whose stories often evoke sympathy, Andrew's tale feels stark. A weary man in a suit attempting to explain himself to a dispassionate audience, clinging to a Pizza Express alibi that failed to elicit any genuine laughter. This sets the stage rather awkwardly for our next entrant, a woman whose blunders are so glaring that even the most patient observers of royal demeanour could question her sincerity. If Prince Andrew represents a catastrophic royal blunder, then Princess Michael of Kent is the epitome of insensitively aristocratic errors, adorned in her signature leopard print. In the intricate web of the British royal family, Princess Michael of Kent stands out as a uniquely provocative figure. Imagine her as the dinner guest who not only brings her own wine but manages to ruffle feathers within minutes, addressing both the host and waiter with unintended barbs, all while questioning the very essence of modernity. Often overshadowed by her more prominent royal relatives, she embodies deeper, more unsettling truths that lurk beneath the polished facade of monarchy. Born Baroness Marie Christine von Ribbenetz in the historically turbulent region of Sudetenland, her entrance into the royal circle came in 1978, marrying Prince Michael of Kent, a cousin to Queen Elizabeth II. From the outset, the public's perception of her was anything but warm. Labeled pushy and pretentious, she quickly garnered the moniker Princess Pushy, encapsulating the blend of allure and haughtiness that seemed to follow her relentlessly. Marie Christine grips social gatherings with a performer's aplomb, her every expression oozing deliberation. Yet, this theatricality invites skepticism, suggesting that perhaps she views those around her as mere support players in her grand narrative. While her royal public life has been peripheral, she never held an official title. Her series of social missteps have, at times, been both telling and cringeworthy. A notable incident unfolded in 2004, when she faced allegations of dismissively telling a group of black diners in a New York restaurant to go back to the colonies. Though she refuted the claim, insisting it was taken out of context, the damage was irrevocable. The media seized on her as a figure of ridicule, while she attempted to defend her stance by citing her past travels and interactions with Africans, a clarification that only deepened the scrutiny. Indeed, Princess Michael's worldview feels disconcertingly antiquated, often reminiscent of a bygone era. She has lamented the loss of mystique in modern royals and has expressed disdain for current societal norms, actively yearning for a Europe she believes is long gone. Even her jewelry choices are laden with unintentional symbolism. A notorious 2017 moment occurred when she wore a brooch depicting an African figure, viewed as racially insensitive, at a royal event attended by Meghan Markle, the first biracial member of today's monarchy. The backlash was immediate and overwhelming. Her insistence that the brooch, a gift she had worn before, was harmless only emphasized her unsettling detachment from contemporary sentiments. This obliviousness, akin to that of an antiquity unaware it resides in a museum, makes her a perplexing character within the royal narrative. She is not villainous in the stereotypical sense, nor does she scheme for influence. Rather, she exists in a perpetual state of unawareness, a byproduct of a life shaped by privilege. Her penchant for comparing herself to historical figures, once claiming a resemblance to Marie Antoinette without irony, highlights a striking disconnect from reality. Contrasting losing a state-subsidized apartment with the execution of Tsar Nicholas II reveals an unsettling talent for minimizing genuine hardship. Through her continuous blunders, Princess Michael illustrates that bad behavior doesn't always equate to scandal. Sometimes it simply reveals profound sincerity. In the hierarchy of royal misdeeds, hers tends to be social rather than criminal, which, in our age of instant outrage and widespread scrutiny, can be even more damaging. She's a vivid representation of an aristocracy grappling with its fading allure in a world that no longer finds its archaic punchlines amusing. While the monarchy endeavors to reshape itself as relatable and progressive, she strides forth, unapologetically vintage, a persistent reminder that not all relics belong encased in glass. As we transition to our next subject, a royal who has utterly transformed the notion of entitlement, let us embrace this captivating journey through the lives of the privileged. Once a member of the British establishment, Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, has since become one of the most polarizing figures in recent history, showcasing moments of royal awkwardness that are both relatable and utterly confounding. If you've weathered this royal storm alongside us, You clearly possess an appreciation for intrigue. Consider subscribing. It's a vow of loyalty minus the threats of decapitation. And while you're at it, share with us where you're tuning in from. Are you awake in New York, or perhaps on your morning commute in Melbourne? We are eager to learn about the fellow wayfarers navigating the shadows of royal controversies with us. Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, once stood as the charismatic, playful figure among the royals, the younger brother whose mischief brought a semblance of warmth to the monarchy. He appeared unburdened by tradition, the one who laughed freely, indulged a bit too heavily, and occasionally forgot about the ever-watchful cameras. The public adored his spontaneous spirit, until the tide turned. The British press, notoriously fickle, initially embraced Harry as their golden boy, a photogenic rebel whose reckless abandon provided the perfect fodder for sensational stories. Yet, beneath that charming facade lay unresolved turmoil, a hidden intensity lurking beneath all the bravado. Harry's formative years were marked by tragedy. The harrowing loss of his mother at a tender age left an indelible mark, and his sorrowful march behind her coffin in public was a moment that shaped him irrevocably. Instead of offering compassion, the narrative surrounding him turned into tabloid fodder, reducing his grief to mere headlines. Thus, he navigated life with two personas, the soldier who served in Afghanistan, and a tabloid star prone to questionable choices and grand gestures. A pivotal moment arrived in 2005, with the infamous Nazi costume incident, transforming him from the charming rogue to the foolish jester. Although he quickly issued an apology, the monarchy's image took a hit, leading to a tightening of constraints around his public persona. Nevertheless, he found a reprieve in military service, acquiring a sense of purpose and respect through initiatives like the Invictus Games, where the stories painted of him grew kinder. However, when Meghan Markle entered the scene, the stakes changed deeply. Their love story elicited mixed reactions, seen by some as a modern fairy tale, while for others, it signaled a dangerous departure from tradition. Harry's embrace of an outsider and ultimate rejection of royal life sparked narratives of rebellion, challenging the very essence of monarchy itself. Their explosive interview with Oprah marked a transformation. Gone was the carefree prince, replaced by a man grappling with feelings of entrapment and betrayal. In a twist of fate, the once humorous critic of royal rigidity emerged as one of the system's loudest detractors, exchanging the confines of palace life for the dynamics of modern media. He became a prominent brand, a humanitarian in the spotlight, navigating through interviews and podcasts despite his yearnings for privacy. This curious contradiction follows him. He is simultaneously a wounded child and an adult molded by privilege, always caught between his criticism of the institution and his inability to detach from it. In the age of social media, Harry transformed into a perpetual figure of fascination, every outcry becoming a trending topic. His narrative, whether seen as brave or arrogant, continues to unfold, encapsulating both the essence of a son wanting liberation from a painful legacy, while still embodying the royal ties he struggles to sever. Yet, the monarchy's next chapter circles back to a very different archetype, revealing a stark contrast. King George IV, a figure of ostentatious indulgence, whose reflection was his true obsession, a model of vanity mischaracterized as nobility. King George IV, the embodiment of excess, stands as a flamboyant figure in the annals of the British monarchy. If one were to visualize a grand parade of self-indulgence, he would undoubtedly be the shining float made entirely of mirrors, reflecting a reality marred by extravagance and vanity. Born George Augustus Frederick in 1762, he was the firstborn of King George III, destined not for greatness, but an extravagant lifestyle drenched in privilege and resentment. Unlike his austere father, young George was enamored with opulence, eager to bask in adoration rather than bear the weight of responsibility. As his youth unfolded, Whispers of scandal began to swirl around him. He secretly wed Maria Fitzherbert, a Roman Catholic widow, incurring the ire of Parliament and shunning the weight of duty. His sanctioned marriage to Caroline of Brunswick was merely an arranged charade. The initial meeting left him demanding brandy upon encountering her, ultimately leading to mutual disdain. Their bitter relationship fueled public gossip while undermining governance, as George preferred evasion over leadership. His passions led to the acquisition of art and architecture, amassing eye-watering debts, with a wardrobe to supply a village, including over 1,000 pairs of gloves. His lavish feasts and lifestyle contrasted sharply with his reign. The Royal Pavilion in Brighton, a surreal blend of Eastern influence and theatricality, encapsulated his desire to experience the grandeur of kings from every culture. Yet, beneath the lavish exterior lay a man rife with insecurity and dissatisfaction. His decade as Prince Regent, marked by his father's illness, exposed a royal figure unprepared for such authority, merely posturing instead of governing. By the time he ascended to king in 1820, his popularity had waned, further eroded by his treatment of Queen Caroline, whose attempts at public recognition led to widespread sympathy for her plight. Political satirists had a field day, depicting him as a bloated, lazy figure, and even aides displayed disdain, one branding him a contemptible, cowardly, selfish, unfeeling dog. Yet, in his exaggerated self-importance, George IV unraveled the illusion of regal dignity, showcasing how even kings could become comical. His legacy resides less in governing prowess and more in being a cautionary narrative swathed in fine fabrics. As George struts through history like a peacock, our exploration takes a grim turn with his successor, King Edward VII, a complex figure who willingly abdicated his crown for love, a move that would set the stage for darker royal intrigues. Prepare for a deeper dive into a tumultuous royal saga, deconstructing notions of nobility entwined with the spectre of narcissism. 5. King Edward VII narrative unfolds like a timeless Shakespearean tragedy, shrouded in myth and allure. When we think of King Edward VIII, we are often drawn into a tale of romantic sacrifice, a king who forsook his throne, enchanted by a divorced American woman, pulling a veil of nobility over stark reality. Imagine the grand orchestra swell, wistful gazes exchanged, as history frames him as the epitome of selfless love. Yet, as we dig deeper into Edward's story, cracks form in this polished facade. The truth reveals he didn't step down for love, he did so for himself. Born in 1894, he was the firstborn of King George V, destined for royalty from his first breath. Edward, with his striking good looks and undeniable charm, was the first modern royal celebrity, capturing hearts throughout the empire. He styled himself as the reluctant prince, performing all the necessary duties with an underlying disdain, for to be king felt like an unbearable chore. He famously declared kingship would be pure hell, and when the moment struck, he showcased his aversion. The real revelation of Edward's character was not merely his love for Wallis Simpson, but his conspicuous disregard for royal duties. His interest lay not in governance but in nightlife and social escapades. As Prince of Wales, his correspondence revealed not strategic insights but complaints about the exhausting tedium of royal expectations. Upon his father's passing in 1936, Edward ascended the throne, nearly dismantling its essence right from the start. He was resistant to tradition, disregarded governmental advice, and transgressed constitutional standards. His love for Wallis turned from private sentiment into a national quagmire. To carry the burden of responsibility without the woman I love is impossible, Edward famously stated, enchanting the nation. Thus, his legend formed. Yet, behind his eloquent words lay a man who had already sought an exit long before Wallis entered his life. Following his abdication, he encountered a disheartening reality. As the Duke of Windsor, he led an opulent, yet melancholy existence, showing little remorse for his throne's departure, but rather a sourness over his lack of benefits. Compounded with this was the unsettling speculation about his political leanings. Declassified records suggest Edward held a troubling fascination with Nazi Germany, visiting Hitler in 1937 and immersing himself in the shadow of authoritarianism. The extent of his sympathies continues to spark debate. However, his coziness with oppressive regimes left many uneasy, leading wartime officials to speculate that he might be a puppet king should the Germans invade. Even post-war, Edward's resentment towards the royal family, especially his brother King George VI, festered. He published memoirs, participated in interviews, and stirred minor scandals from his withdrawn haven. The man who had once captivated the globe spent his remaining years desperately trying to justify his decision. What makes Edward VII particularly exasperating is not just his privileged background but the hollowness that filled it. With countless benefits at his fingertips, he fled from duty under the guise of passion but unwound in confusion for decades. As we pivot now, we see the contrast of the next royal, one who remained amid turbulence, strain, and a gradual decline into madness, King George III. Here we find a monarch whose psyche frayed even as the empire endured, unraveling a narrative far more complex than the caricature of insanity that history often frames. 6. King George III. To many, King George III embodies a mere punchline in cultural history. The mad king who lost America, a figure in a catchy Hamilton song, a monarch whose descent into madness became fodder for theatre and memes. Yet, beneath this oversimplified facade lies a more complex, tragic, and deeply unsettling reality. George III's reign was not solely marked by his losses, but rather by the things he could not control: his mental state, his court, and ultimately, the very narrative of his reign. Born in 1738 and crowned in 1760, George ascended to the throne at just 22, brimming with the idealism and strict values of someone determined not to be merely a puppet. He was the first Hanoverian king born in Britain, fluent in English, and believed wholeheartedly in the divine responsibility of monarchy. But such conviction came at a significant cost. George saw himself as an active guardian of moral order, often mistaking his personal obsessions for righteous duty. During his early reign, George was unexpectedly diligent, a devoted ruler who took his position seriously, reviewing legislation and meeting with ministers. Unlike many kings of his era, he valued family and maintained fidelity, displaying a certain earnest awkwardness. Yet, beneath this veneer of stability, George's inflexible nature prevented him from adapting to the rapidly changing world. He viewed compromise as a sign of weakness, a belief that bore dire consequences in his interactions with the American colonies. Though the American Revolution was not solely his fault, factors like Parliament's decisions, taxation, and military errors played roles. George internalized the conflict. He perceived rebellion not as political dissent, but as a moral affront, unable to grasp that his subjects desired autonomy rather than disloyalty. His tone grew severe in his correspondence. To him, negotiation equated to surrender, rendering diplomacy futile. Following the defeat, George pondered abdication, not out of recognition of failure, but because he struggled with the notion that his authority could be challenged. However, the king's political obstinacy is eclipsed by the gradual public disintegration of his mental health. Historians still hypothesize about the cause, possibly porphyria, bipolar disorder, or immense stress intensified by genetic factors. Regardless of the specifics, the signs were glaring. George would converse for hours, often to empty spaces. His letters became tangled and incoherent. He lost touch with his environment, raged at those around him, and sometimes required restraint. In the ironic twist of fate for a monarch who prided himself on rationality, this was a tragic decline. Yet, in his moments of clarity, George stubbornly clung to his position. The Regency Act was enacted only when it was unequivocally clear he could no longer rule, after considerable political maneuvering. His son, the future George IV, took on the role of Prince Regent, heralding a decade of coexisting between a mentally incapacitated father and a self-indulgent son. George III's later years were spent in solitude at Windsor Castle, blind, deaf, and fragmented from reality. He outlived many of his children, his beloved wife Charlotte, and the political landscape he once sought to govern. When he passed away in 1820 at the age of 81, Britain had transformed into a new realm. The empire flourished, the monarchy was evolving, and the perception of the king, once seen as a divine entity, was irrevocably altered. What makes George III a figure of intrigue is not just his tragic descent into insanity, but how that insanity reflected the monarchy itself, powerful, steadfast, and increasingly disconnected. His reign signaled the end of one type of kingship and the reluctant emergence of another, where rulers appeared less like deities and more like relatable individuals. While George's tragedy was largely internal, the next royal's dysfunction unfolded in the public eye, loud and theatrical amidst scandal. She was simultaneously celebrated, scorned, and mocked by the very court that elevated her to the throne, a woman loathed by a nation and trapped in a grotesque union characterized by mutual disdain. Meet Queen Caroline of Brunswick, the royal consort no one desired, especially not her own husband. 7. Queen Caroline of Brunswick. Within the somber yet dramatic tapestry of British royalty, Queen Caroline of Brunswick found herself ensnared in perhaps the most scandalous divorce of her time, a spectacle viewed by the world with morbid fascination. Tied to a husband who held nothing but disdain for her, she was relentlessly vilified by a court that scorned her and paraded through the media of the day like a character in an early 19th century drama. Depending on who one spoke to, she was either a tragic victim or an outrageously contentious figure, often embodying both roles simultaneously. Born in 1768 into German nobility, Caroline was wed to George, the Prince of Wales, later known as George IV, in a calculated royal alliance devoid of emotional connection, where political utility overshadowed personal affinity. The architects of this marriage anticipated at least some semblance of unity, but what unfolded was immediate and mutual loathing. George was alleged to have required copious amounts of alcohol to survive their wedding night, later recalling little from it due to inebriation. Caroline did not fare any better in her impressions, candidly documenting her husband's weight, pallor, and less than stellar dental situation. Despite their mutual repulsion, they had a child, Princess Charlotte, after which they effectively separated. Caroline faced semi-exile while George indulged in his life of excess. Initially, she relished the freedom from the royal court, traveling and entertaining in ways that made the establishment visibly uncomfortable. Loud, unapologetic, and delightfully dismissive of public opinion, Caroline's behavior marked her as an outcast in a world that expected silence from royal women, especially those ostracized. Instead, she succeeded in cultivating a circle of eccentrics and foreign friends, with many suggesting these relationships crossed into something more intimate. The whispers of infidelity culminated in the notorious 1806 investigation, a legal inquiry that, while officially inconclusive, left Caroline publicly shamed. Yet, she remained the legally recognized Princess of Wales. When George ascended to the throne in 1820, she attempted to claim her rightful role as queen, but he was relentless in his efforts to exclude her. Amidst this turmoil, Caroline returned to England, buoyed by an unexpected wave of public support. Crowds gathered, chanting her name. She became a symbol of defiance, particularly among the working class who saw in her not a paragon of virtue, but a flawed heroine battling royal hypocrisy. However, Caroline was not without her faults. Although her defiance was notable, her actions often appeared erratic and ill-advised. She made dubious political choices, surrounded herself with questionable allies, and struggled to embody the virtuous woman the public desired. Her futile attempts to enter Westminster Abbey during George's coronation became farcical as she was repeatedly denied entry, circling the Abbey in her carriage, a poignant commentary on her place in the monarchy. Caroline's life ended in August 1821, shortly after, from an ailment aggravated by the stress and humiliation she endured. Her epitaph read, "Here lies Caroline of Brunswick, the injured Queen of England," ensuring her legacy lingered even in death. Her story forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth. What unfolds when neither party in a royal dispute earns sympathy? Caroline may not have epitomized the ideal queen, but she highlighted the flaws of a royal system more concerned with appearances than humanity. If Caroline flickered rebelliously around the edges of monarchy, the next figure in our descent set fire to the entire structure, then pondered the shattered remnants of the once majestic window. Ruthless, stern, and chillingly convinced of his own virtue, King Charles I was not merely unpopular. He became a polarizing force that sparked a civil war. 8. King Charles I, a monarch whose ability to gauge the shifting tides of power was profoundly flawed. If British kings were assessed on their skill in understanding the sentiment of the times, Charles, a man whose dedication to his own divine authority bordered on delusion, would be likened to one staring into a raging inferno, believing it merely a flickering candle. Unlike the ostentatious George IV or the tragically human George III, Charles embodied a far more perilous spirit, wrapped tightly in the rigid protocols that defined him, showing a palpable aversion to compromise. Born in 1600 as the second son of King James I, Charles never anticipated donning the crown until the untimely demise of his elder brother thrust him into the role of heir apparent, leading to his coronation in 1625. Where James had been vibrant and philosophical, his son adopted a demeanor of reserved piety, navigating his kingship with the conviction of possessing not just royal lineage, but a direct mandate from the heavens. This mindset, while creating grand portraits, reaped havoc in the realm of governance. Charles's relationship with Parliament quickly soured, as he adhered firmly to the divine right of kings, the belief that monarchs, anointed by God, were above earthly concerns, including elected representatives clad in wigs. As Parliament transformed into a bastion for individuals with wealth and newfound revolutionary concepts of accountability, conflict became inevitable, evolving from ideological discord to personal enmity. In a move that would seal his fate, Charles dissolved Parliament entirely in 1629, embarking on an 11-year stretch known as the Personal Rule, which was anything but tranquil. Governing without legislative consent, he resorted to archaic taxes and unpopular financial maneuvers, generating public resentment akin to that felt in Boston over taxation without representation. Even more contentious was his religious stance. With a fervent Anglican faith and a Catholic queen, Henrietta Maria of France, Charles appointed bishops aligned with high church traditions, inciting the anger of Puritans and reformers nationwide. The nation, already feeling politically sidelined, became engulfed in spiritual betrayal, igniting a climate of suspicion and sectarian strife underneath the oppressive rule of a king fixated more on ceremonies than on effective governance. The ensuing civil war was a cataclysmic explosion of tension, where royalists pledged allegiance to Charles clashed with the parliamentarians led by Oliver Cromwell and his fervent reformers. It was a profound struggle for power and, more importantly, a crisis of monarchy itself. Unflinching in his belief in divine right, Charles refused earnest negotiations. He was imprisoned, released, then imprisoned again. His penchant for secretive deals left him repeatedly isolated, further eroding trust. In 1649, after protracted warfare and futile negotiations, he faced trial for treason, a radical departure from a world where kings were perceived as answerable only to God. The verdict was guilty, and he was sentenced to death, a moment immortalized as a king judged by those he ruled, unprecedented in English history. Yet, rather than express regret, Charles seized the opportunity to showcase an unwavering stoicism, convinced of his righteousness, not in the political arena, but on a spiritual plane. In this self-perception, he achieved martyrdom. While monarchists immortalized him as St. Charles the Martyr, the public largely viewed him as a tragic figure whose hubris cost the crown dearly, at least for a time. Charles wasn't inherently evil. He embodied rigidity. In an era teeming with transformation, he resembled a statue unable to withstand the shifting landscape beneath him. His undoing was not merely one egregious act, but rather an incessant belief in his divine right to govern without evolution, while the populace began to suspect that perhaps God had revised the script. And if Charles represented the monarch who fractured the crown through a desperate grip, the next king would reshape the throne, imbued with violence, charisma, and a dogged belief in the supremacy of his desires. For while Charles lost his head, King Henry VIII adept maintained his, ensuring others shared a decidedly less fortunate fate. 9. King Henry VIII. In the grand tapestry of monarchy, certain figures loom larger than life, casting shadows over every portrait, policy, and passage of history. For England, that towering presence is none other than King Henry VIII. He transcended the role of mere king. He became an emblem, a single entity embodying the vibrant chaos of medieval power, decked in finery, jewels, and a questionable ethical compass. Even centuries later, the mention of his name evokes images of opulent thrones, raucous feasts, and the tragic saga of his multiple queens. Yet, beneath the surface of extravagance and bravado lay a monarch who expertly blurred the lines between his personal aspirations and the nation's governance, with his greatest flaws not only tolerated but codified. Born in 1491 as the second son of Henry VII, young Henry wasn't destined for the throne. But fate took a turn when his brother Arthur passed away, and at merely 17, he ascended to kingship, wearing the crown like a child trying on his father's oversized coat, brimming with excitement yet oblivious to the weight of responsibility. Initially, he embodied everything a Renaissance prince should be: athletic, erudite, and engaging. He jousted, created music, penned poetry, and spoke several languages. Yet beneath this charm lay an unsettling insecurity that would only magnify with time. Henry inherited a stable kingdom and set out to transform it into the stage for his grand narrative, viewing himself as a noble protagonist wronged by those unable to recognize his greatness. However, it was his desperate quest for a male heir that ultimately shaped and warped his legacy. His first spouse, Catherine of Aragon, bore him a daughter, Mary, yet the absence of a surviving son was perceived by Henry as a cosmic slight, a distortion of divine intent. This ignited a fervent political and spiritual upheaval that would leave an indelible mark on England's history. When the Pope denied him an annulment, Henry boldly severed ties with the Catholic Church, declaring himself the supreme head of the newly formed Church of England. This audacious act, revolutionary in its essence, was not rooted in theology but rather as a legal maneuver to facilitate remarriage, which he pursued an astonishing 6 times. Each new wife became a strategic play, cloaked as romance, but when these unions faltered, the consequences were dire. To merely label Henry a tyrant overlooks the more profound complexities of his character. He was not solely cruel. He was marked by intense reactions, paranoia, and fluctuating trust and vindictiveness. Henry would elevate his advisors, figures like Thomas More, Thomas Cromwell, and Anne Boleyn, only to cast them aside when their narratives clashed with his vision. Loyalty and competence mattered little next to the perilous proximity to the throne, which could turn fatal at any moment. As the years rolled on, Henry transformed dramatically from the radiant youth celebrated at his coronation. He became a bloated, isolated figure, plagued by both physical maladies and the weight of political burdens. The once vibrant court degenerated into a festering lair of suspicion, where even a hint of treason lingered ominously in the air. His temperament fluctuated wildly, justice became a capricious affair, and his ability to introspect seemed wholly absent. Despite leaving a nation forever changed, the English Reformation, the dissolution of monasteries, and an emerging sense of nationalism, Henry inadvertently modernized the monarchy, not through intent, but sheer force. He crafted a realm centered on the crown, dictated by his will rather than the Church of Rome. His successors would inherit not just his bloodline but also the framework of personal governance disguised as national purpose. Yet, what truly comprises Henry's legacy is less about his commanding power and more about how that power often justifies egregious actions. He was self-serving, volatile, and frequently unjust, yet he remains a figure of immense significance in British history. His reign serves as a testament to the idea that charisma can alter the course of history, brute force can pose as leadership, and that a crown can transform personal desires into national doctrine. In contrast, the royal who followed, draped in his daunting shadow, carried a different essence. Queen Anne, existing in a court rife with sickness, favoritism, and intricate manipulation, found herself at the center of this tumult, grappling with the heartache of a power she never fully embraced or desired. Queen Anne, unlike the roaring Henry VIII or the revolutionary Charles I, she was a monarch whose presence whispered through history rather than shouted. Anne's reign, spanning from 1702 into the early 18th century, unfolded not in flamboyant celebrations or scandalous revelries, but enveloped in a poignant melancholy that lingered in the opulent halls of her palaces. Her ascent to the throne followed the complexities of a turbulent royal lineage that kept Britain firmly Protestant, even when it yearned for something different. Born in 1665 as the daughter of James II, she found herself the last of the Stuarts to rule, a moment marked by the creation of Great Britain itself. Yet, this milestone felt strangely disconnected from the woman at its helm, and was not a revolutionary force but rather a monarch who grappled with the weight of her title. Her personal destiny was marred by immense loss, including numerous miscarriages and the death of all her children, creating an atmosphere of profound grief around her. Suffering from chronic illness, likely autoimmune in nature, she was often a subject of pity in the court. In her quest for solace, and formed a deep bond with Sarah Churchill, the Duchess of Marlborough. Their friendship, rich with emotional complexity, became a lens through which history examined royal power dynamics. Initially supportive, their relationship soured under the pressure of ambition and desire for autonomy, leading to a turbulent split during which Abigail Masham entered the picture as Anne's new confidant. As her court was engulfed in drama, manipulations reminiscent of a modern thriller, and still bore the heavy mantle of leadership amidst the chaos. Her reign was marked by pivotal events such as the Acts of Union and the War of the Spanish Succession, where she supported traditional Toryism while exhibiting a lack of political finesse. Conversations with her ministers were riddled with misunderstandings, and her court presence exhibited an oddly shy demeanor that belied her royal status. By the end of her life in 1714, and had become increasingly withdrawn and physically unwell, her body reflecting the weight of expectations that ultimately proved burdensome. When she passed away, childless and weary, it was a poignant close to the Stuart line, a solitary figure, her coffin borne by guards not out of respect but necessity. Anne's reign might not have been marked by tragedy or scandal, yet it resonated with the discomfort of an unfit ruler striving for belonging in a world that demanded perfection. A queen without heirs, devoid of the confidence often expected from royalty, her human frailty illuminated the essence of her legacy. As we transition from Anne's wistful reign, we are led into the exuberant, often scandalous life of her successor, Prince George IV, a figure who embraced royal expectations with a boldness that turned dignity into mere spectacle. Prince George IV, a royal figure whose every move felt less like a momentous reign and more akin to an ongoing scandal chronicled in the tabloids, shaped by indulgence and shadows of financial ruin. We've encountered George before, when he donned the persona of a reluctant king during his troubled union with Caroline of Brunswick. Yet his reign as king unfolds a saga of monumental missteps deserving a standalone tale in history's archives. George IV inherited not just a crown but also a complex arsenal of royal carelessness, wielding it almost gleefully. By the time the year 1820 heralded his kingship, George had been acting as Prince Regent for almost a decade, standing in for his father, George III, who was imprisoned by his own mind. This title, however, did little to curb George's reckless tendencies. Instead, it granted him the facade of authority without the burdens of true governance. Under the guise of the regent, he turned the political stage into a theatre, his court life a lavish costume drama, and curated his own image like a grand canvas, often literally. His surroundings dripped with excessive luxury, leaving his contemporaries agape with embarrassment. Everything he touched was gilded or extravagantly decorated, his taste remaining indisputable yet wholly unmoored from restraint. At the heart of his hedonism stood the Brighton Pavilion, a surreal spectacle of Eastern-inspired architecture, draped in domes and dragons, a design that made even Versailles appear modest. It embodied grandeur, bloated like its owner. As king, George IV was notorious not for his rule, but for dodging responsibility. Famously, he absented himself from his own coronation feast, citing ill health, when in truth, the thought of facing guests aware of his distasteful actions toward his late wife Caroline, who met a mysterious end, was unbearable. Public opinion soured dramatically, transforming the once charming prince into a figure of mockery, a self-indulgent monarch whose physical decline mirrored his political insignificance. Years of indulgence manifested in rapid health degradation. He became exceedingly overweight, perpetually inflamed, and racked with discomfort. Wearing corsets to maintain his posture, he demanded constant flattery from his courtiers, who were coerced into believing that the almost immobile king retained regal splendor. In the political realm, George languished in disengagement, resisting the tide of reform while favoring fawning company over diligent ministers. He distrusted Parliament and loathed the press, perceiving the public not as subjects but as bothersome interlopers. His letters dripped with self-pity and dramatization of perceived grievances, overshadowed by a tragic performative quality. Beneath all the opulence was a profoundly insecure man wrestling with his public persona, commissioning countless portraits of his younger self, longing for the days past. With his death in 1830 eliciting little sorrow, the Times encapsulated his legacy with the scathing line that no one would miss him, a harsh but fitting epitaph. While George IV did not obliterate the monarchy, he certainly left his mark, treating the throne as a mere prop instead of a noble duty. His reign serves as a cautionary tale of what occurs when royal identity devolves into mere performance. Yet as George IV floundered beneath his own vanity, a new monarch emerged from vastly different origins. Meet King William IV, a former sailor with a brash demeanour who transformed Buckingham Palace into a raucous place reminiscent of a bustling dockside tavern. A king who attempted to rule with the grit of a seaman found himself caught between two centuries, grappling with contrasting ideals of royalty. King William IV. If we picture King George IV as a figure wrapped in velvet, wine, and denial, then King William IV is a stark contrast, a man of grit, bristle, and the unmistakable scent of sea air. Known as the Sailor King, he carried with him the essence of saltwater and gunpowder. By the time he ascended to the throne in 1830, he seemed a remnant of a bygone era. No regal demeanor graced him. He neither looked nor acted like a king, and truth be told, he did not relish the role. Yet, history placed the crown upon his head, and what followed was a reign infused with awkward decency, unintended reforms, and a refreshing, albeit undignified, honesty that royal PR experts today would spend fortunes to sanitize. Born in 1765 as the third son of King George III, William lived the majority of his life under the assumption he would never wear the crown. This perspective gifted him a rare privilege, the freedom to navigate life outside the harsh spotlight of monarchy. He joined the Royal Navy at age 13, engaging earnestly in battles and facing the tempest of the sea, experiences far removed from the ceremonial routines of court life. The Navy offered him not just structure, but also a sense of purpose that court life failed to provide. However, this maritime background also shaped his character in more visceral ways. He was straightforward to the point of being crass, utterly devoid of the genteel mannerisms expected of royalty. Swearing, interrupting ministers, and sharing inappropriate tales at the dinner table were commonplace for him. He had little tolerance for formalities or the political finesse often seen within palace walls, earning him both admiration and concern. In numerous ways, he represented a monarch too normal for the times. Yet, behind this straightforward front, William's personal life was as tumultuous and dramatic as that of any of his predecessors. He spent 2 decades with his mistress, actress Dorothea Jordan, and fathered 10 illegitimate children, known as the Fitzclarences. Although he later married Adelaide of Saxe-Meiningen for political reasons, his enduring bond with his first family placed him at odds with the palace elite. Ascending to the throne at the age of 64, due largely to the deaths or misfortunes of his elder siblings, William brought his unpredictable spirit to royalty. His political involvement was heartfelt but sometimes messy. He espoused some progressive reforms, like the abolition of slavery, yet resisted others, such as extending voting rights. The most significant political turmoil during his reign unfolded between 1831 and 1832 as Parliament teetered on the brink of collapse over extending the vote to more middle-class citizens. Caught amid reformists and conservatives, he attempted to mediate. However, when conditions escalated, he surprised many by threatening to bolster the House of Lords with new pro-reform members if they rejected the bill. His ultimatum proved effective, hinting at a profound choice. Between the aristocracy and staving off revolution, he reluctantly chose the latter. Yet, William's temper was notorious. He once stormed out of a cabinet meeting, exclaiming his utter confusion regarding the workings of these blasted lawyers. At public events, his off-the-cuff remarks and long-winded complaints about speeches often came off as unwittingly impolite, with diplomacy feeling more like an option than a requirement. His reign spanned just 7 years, concluding with his death in 1837. In that brief time, he managed to usher the monarchy, imperfectly and stubbornly, into the Victorian era. He was neither brilliant nor graceful, but his honesty, often brutally candid, set him apart. And if William IV was the unrefined sailor king, the upcoming monarch would be his refined, indulgent nephew, King Edward VII, a man whose appetites rivaled those of Henry VIII, adorned with an Edwardian charm that made vice alluringly fashionable. Thus, we meet King Edward VII, the playboy prince finally perched on the throne, accompanied by his tailor, ready to embark on his reign. The story of King Edward VII, a life in the shadows. King Edward VII, born in 1841, spent 4 decades yearning for respect and legitimacy. When he finally took the throne in 1901 at the age of 59, it was after the longest wait for a British heir. He entered the royal spotlight with an air of confidence, adorned with monogram cufflinks, embodying the spirit of a man who felt the true celebration had only just begun. As the firstborn of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, Edward, known affectionately as Bertie, was destined to disappoint. His parents, resolutely intellectual and moralistic, sharply contrasted with his carefree passions for hunting, gambling, and high society. After Prince Albert's untimely death in 1861, Queen Victoria's relationship with her son soured, as she irrationally associated his lifestyle with her grief. Their connection, once marked by warmth, became a cold formality, leaving Bertie as the most notable man in Britain, yet disempowered and largely ignored. Despite this confinement, he revelled in extravagant pursuits, becoming a renowned figure across Europe, with Paris as his playground. Edward's charm and understanding of human nature became his quiet weapons of influence in the absence of formal authority. While the Queen withdrew, he engaged with society, forging alliances with foreign dignitaries and creating a new soft power model for royalty, often viewed as frivolous. Upon ascending to the throne as King Edward VII, he surprised many with a refreshing approach to monarchy. He infused energy into the crown, travelled extensively, and hosted extravagant affairs, skillfully easing tensions between Britain and France, contributing to landmark agreements through personal diplomacy. However, his reign was not without its controversies. Scandals mirrored his lavish lifestyle. Gambling debts and whispered rumours of illegitimate children contrasted sharply with his royal image. The iconic chair designed for his expanding waist revealed the humour in his situation, a symbol of both royal grandeur and human frailty. Edward VII passed away in 1910, leaving a legacy entwined with contradictions. His reign announced an age of elegance amid the chaos of his indulgences. He was both a revelatory figure and a disappointment, humanizing the monarchy in a way that resonated across the nation. Yet, as he indulged in life's pleasures, the spectre of Queen Victoria remained, a ruler whose grasp on her family and empire reflected both love and battlefield-like conflict. Queen Victoria, a figure who once reigned over a vast expanse of the globe and shaped a significant part of its ethical landscape, yet struggled to control her own feelings and manage her notoriously troubled family. Heralded as the unwavering matriarch of the British Empire, the grieving widow always clad in black, and an icon of decorum, the reality beneath this grand facade reveals a ruler riddled with complexities. She was as passionate as she was authoritarian, deeply attached yet also emotionally austere, and far less amused than the tales suggest. Born in 1819, Victoria ascended the throne at just 18, a position she never expected to inherit. However, a succession of unexpected deaths and familial crises swiftly placed her in charge of an empire soon to expand its influence worldwide. Her early reign appeared almost fairy tale-like, an enchanting blend of royal drama and romance. Her love for her cousin, Prince Albert, defied her advisors, leading to a celebrated partnership that mixed family joy with royal image crafting. Tragedy struck when Albert succumbed to typhoid in 1861, leaving Victoria bereaved and reclusive, retreating from her royal duties into a long, penetrating shadow of mourning. For over a decade, she largely abandoned state responsibilities, igniting feelings of irritation and anger among government officials and the public. While the country pressed on, the Queen's absence turned her presence into an almost ghostly figure in political life. In her solitude, she wielded a powerful private influence, marked by deep emotional currents. Her letters to her children brimmed with melodrama and moral reprimands, a mother torn between affection and overbearing control. Favoritism was frequent, but it quickly soured when her children stepped out of line, straining relationships to the point of irreparability. Her son, Bertie, known later as Edward III, felt the weight of her disappointment, branded as unambitious and unworthy of the crown, while he yearned to escape her grasp. Victoria's political clout exceeded her perception of it. Although a constitutional monarch, she was unabashed in expressing her views on ministers, wars, and moral matters. She held disdain for Gladstone, adored Disraeli, and cleverly maneuvered through back-channel communications to assert her stance on state affairs. Her rule leaned more on emotional pressure rather than official decrees, wielding influence that ranged from subtlety to suffocation. Her personal sentiments often influenced colonial policy, particularly in her complicated affection for India. This bond became scandalous with her close relationship to an Indian servant, Abdul Karim, which outraged the court as she treated him as both a confidant and a political player. Despite being touted as the portrait of Victorian virtue, Victoria often fell short of this ideal. Petulance, obsession, and chilling detachment mingled with her grief, which became the essence of her identity and authority. Ultimately, the monarchy she left behind was steeped in paradox, a globally exalted institution, yet internally fragile and bruised by the very woman who sought to fortify it. And as she leveraged emotion as a political tool, her successor, King George V, introduced a stark contrast, a reign dominated by discipline, silence, and a palpable chill that permeated the family structure, instilling fear in his own children as they heard his footsteps approach. King George V stands in stark contrast to his father, the flamboyant King Edward VII. Where Edward was the debonair playboy who deftly balanced indulgence with effective rule, George was a figure marked by sternness and a distinct lack of personal flair. He favored formality over exuberance, carrying a serious demeanor that replaced his father's charm with an air of discipline and, at times, fear, a quality that echoed even within his own household. Born in 1865 as the second son of Edward VII, George was initially not destined for the throne. That future belonged to his older brother, Prince Albert Victor, whose untimely death in 1892 thrust George into a role he had never anticipated, abruptly pulling him from a naval career he cherished. Rather than being a revolutionary figure, George V strove to maintain the monarchy's status quo, reinforcing it into a rigid institution. His reign beginning in 1910 coincided with profound global upheavals, the First World War, the Russian Revolution, and the disintegration of other European monarchies. Yet, amidst this chaos, he stood as a cold pillar of continuity. He lacked warmth, not only in public but also within the walls of his own home, characterized by strictness towards his children and a strained relationship with his heir, the future Edward VIII. George's relationship with his son was fraught, filled with disappointment born from Edward's perceived unseriousness and affinity for American divorcees. Ironically, George's true display of royal clarity emerged not from his governance, but due to a tactical name change during World War I. Amid rising anti-German sentiment, he transformed the royal family's name from the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha to the House of Windsor, a clever yet superficial move that signified loyalty to his subjects over distant relatives in Germany. Despite this shrewdness, George's Victorian mindset persisted. His private life was marked by a palpable dread of family weekends, a fearsome presence that left his children apprehensive and his court on edge. His lack of emotional warmth was evident in a harrowing decision concerning his Russian royal cousins, who pleaded for refuge during the Bolshevik Revolution. Initially agreeing to grant them asylum, George retreated from his promise, fearing public backlash, which ultimately condemned the Romanov family to execution, a decision that haunted him quietly. When George V passed away in 1936, he did so worn and afflicted by illness. His last years were shadowed by a mixture of disappointment in his son and a grim satisfaction that the monarchy had merely endured rather than flourished. Yet, the survival of the crown soon became the least of concerns, as the next royal figure to follow was a much different breed. Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, known less for decorum and more for his sharp tongue and foot-in-mouth moments. The stage was set for a new era, far less precise than the last. Once upon a time, in the ever-evolving tapestry of British royalty, there lived Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. If Queen Elizabeth II exemplified the steadfast essence of the monarchy, Philip served as the candid voice echoing behind her. His commentary on royal affairs was a mix of wit, wisdom, and often an inappropriate boldness, sometimes leaving onlookers in shock. Over his extraordinary span as consort, Philip did not shy away from articulating what many were thinking, providing royal aides with a steady stream of frustration and tabloid editors with an endless source of material. Born in 1921 in an unconventional setting, a modest kitchen in Corfu, Philip's entry into life was anything but typical for royalty. His was a childhood steeped in turmoil. Hailing from Greek and Danish noble roots, he was forced into exile before he could even take his first steps. His early years were characterized by a whirlwind of movement across Europe, France, Germany, Britain, often marked by separations from his parents and a fluid sense of identity. By the time he married Elizabeth in 1947, he emerged as a complex individual, a blend of royal lineage and refugee experience, a sailor and a wanderer. The British elite viewed him as an outsider, perceived as arrogant and a touch too direct, traits he never really shed, much to their unease. His service in the Royal Navy during World War II instilled within him a sense of order and discipline, teaching him the value of duty executed without complaint, a lesson he attempted to instill in those around him. Yet, when Elizabeth ascended to the throne in 1952, Philip found himself encased in a puzzling predicament. A man of action relegated to the shadows of a ceremonial role, required to trail 2 steps behind his wife and remain silent, an instruction he seldom followed. Intelligent and straightforward, Philip maintained a relentless curiosity about life. An avid reader with a penchant for challenging discussions, he became an early advocate for pressing issues such as wildlife conservation and technological advancement. He initiated the Duke of Edinburgh's Award, encouraging youth to foster resilience and skill, a legacy overshadowed by his infamous one-liners. His remarks ranged from awkward inquiries with British students in China about spear throwing to blunt observations about Scottish road safety. When meeting with deaf children, his comments skirted the border between humour and insensitivity, leading many to view him as dated or refreshingly honest, while his press team faced persistent PR crises. Yet, within this controversy lay an essential truth. Philip was not cruel but rather impatient. He exhibited a distaste for pretense, bureaucracy, and a modern sentimentality he found tiresome. During the public mourning of Princess Diana, when tears were expected from the palace, Philip's instinct was to uphold stoicism, inadvertently fueling a growing public disdain for royal emotional detachment. Behind closed doors, however, he was fiercely loyal and pushed for modernization within the monarchy, ensuring that his children received a better education while serving as the family's internal skeptic. In essence, he became the balance to Elizabeth's symbolic stature, she, the representation of royalty, he, the voice of reality. Philip passed away in 2021 at the remarkable age of 99, witnessing the monarchy navigate through scandals and a changing world, increasingly critical of inherited privilege. His complex legacy remains a portrait of contradictions. A man born to royalty, tempered by war, shaped by exile, and affected by an institution that struggled to define him. And as we shift our gaze to the next royal figure, we meet Prince William, the Prince of Wales. a man whose public charm and impeccable style may conceal a temper that hints at his royal lineage. With expectations weighing heavily upon him, William represents a new chapter, one where the legacy of his grandfather looms large, weaving through the fabric of modern monarchy with an air of both promise and tempest. Prince William, the Prince of Wales, has consistently been portrayed as the quintessential reliable figure, the responsible brother, the steadfast heir. He stood as a counterbalance to family turbulence, the royal embodiment of prudence against a backdrop of chaos. The media, seeking a straightforward narrative, dubbed him the modern-day Diana, a prince with his mother's charisma but without his father's shadows. Yet, beneath the polished facade of charitable endeavors and public roles, another story unfolds, one focused on control rather than calm. Born in 1982 amid the widely publicized collapse of his parents' tumultuous marriage, William grew up in an environment infused with contradiction, the golden child of a fairy tale yet a quiet observer of its dissolution. His formative years were marked by a sense of instability disguised as pageantry, with family wounds hidden deep within palace corridors. Often in the spotlight, William's early life was scrutinized, not only by paparazzi but by a nation eager for a story of redemption. Following the tragic passing of his mother, media attention surged, and he quickly recognized his role, to not only endure the burdens of monarchy but to refresh its image. For a time, he played this role commendably. He excelled at Eton, served in the armed forces, piloted rescue helicopters, and married Catherine Middleton, a woman whose charm and appeal have notably reintegrated her into the royal narrative. Together, they embodied the archetypal modern couple, blending middle-class sensibilities with ancient traditions. However, behind the palace walls, the reality diverges from this image of harmony. Those who have worked closely with William, albeit discreetly, note an underlying temperament, not overtly explosive but rather icy and uncompromising. He reportedly maintains high expectations of his staff, displaying little tolerance for failure or insubordination. In the traditionally hierarchical structure of the monarchy, he does not shy away from asserting his authority, a stark contrast to the approachable image he projects to the public. William's rapport with the media is equally intricate. Unlike his brother, he opted not to evade this framework but mastered it. The palace's press apparatus shields him with a power typically reserved for state leaders. Stories vanish, photographs disappear, and journalists are acutely aware of the boundaries they must respect. While he plays his public role, there are lines he will defend fiercely when pushed. Then, there's the dynamic with his brother, Harry. The deeply analyzed schism between them echoes throughout the media landscape, centered around William's conviction that duty supersedes personal feelings, that the crown represents a job, not a therapeutic framework. This principle once united the siblings. Now, it is a wedge between them. Though William's history lacks scandal, no financial improprieties or headline-grabbing crises, what secures his place in this discourse is far subtler. There's a persistent undercurrent suggesting that beneath the prince's charm lies a mind like a steel trap. The future king, the face of contemporary royalty, may exercise an equally ruthless approach to safeguarding the institution as his less refined predecessors, albeit with greater discretion. Ultimately, William doesn't require theatrics to wield power. His strategy lies in endurance, a game he seems poised to master. In contrast, his counterpart in royalty has navigated a far more labyrinthine path, aloof yet manipulative, eloquent in progressivism, yet allegedly small-minded privately. A man destined for kingship, molded by years of anticipation, whispers, and maneuvering from the fringe. Now, the moment has arrived for King Charles III, formerly known as Prince Charles, ushering in his reign, enigmatic as ever and draped in organic cotton. King Charles III. For the majority of his life, he was the ever-watchful heir, poised in the shadows, contemplating the significance of his long-awaited debut. For over 70 years, he prepared for a role crafted by destiny, yet his opportunity to shine seemed perpetually deferred. During this time, he emerged as a unique figure, a monarch shaped by a complex narrative, a public record, and a veil of ambiguity that left many questioning his true essence. Born in 1948, the crown was his from birth, yet it was evident early on that he diverged from royal tradition. With a sensitivity that contrasted starkly with his mother's charisma and his father's directness, he found himself at odds with expectations. His formative years were spent at Gordon Town, a rigorous Scottish boarding school notorious for its austere conditions and harsh discipline, where he disliked every moment, internalizing the notion that emotions were best suppressed and duty should shield him from vulnerability. As the Prince of Wales, Charles embraced a plethora of public engagements, delivered countless speeches, and championed causes that polarized opinion, some lauded, others perplexing. He was a pioneer in environmentalism, organic farming, sustainable architecture, and interfaith dialogue, though his fervor was sometimes overshadowed by a tone that oscillated between earnestness and elitism. Viewing himself as a custodian of the earth and its traditions, he often acted as if he held a monopoly on wisdom regarding the nation's needs. Amidst his advocacy lay the tumult of personal affairs. His idyllic romance with Princess Diana morphed into a widely televised tragedy, revealing deep-seated incompatibilities on multiple levels. By the late 1990s, the prince's reputation was tarnished by scandals, only partially softened by time and further complicated by his enduring relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles, now Queen Consort. While many royals faced ruin, Charles learned to adapt, albeit slowly and awkwardly. His public relations efforts salvaged his image, and eventually, the public's perception began to shift. He embraced philanthropy, founded the Prince's Trust, and nurtured a vision of Britain that respected tradition while also embracing progressive notions like sustainability and resilience. He transformed his public persona from glamorous to one focused on stewardship. Yet, rumors persist of a spoiled temperament behind the palace walls, with tales of exacting demands and obsessive details shared by anonymous former staff, handwritten notes, romanticized specifications for toothpaste, and precision-cooked eggs. These quirks, though not outrageous, reflect a man who spent 7 decades yearning for authority, determined to make his reign count. The year 2022 marked a pivotal moment. With the passing of Queen Elizabeth II, Charles ascended the throne. His coronation was both ceremonial and hauntingly surreal, the lifelong culmination of his training for a role he would finally assume in his 70s. Though he speaks of service and legacy, an undercurrent of self-justification laces his narrative. This monarchy, he insists, is not only born of lineage but molded by years of unfulfilled ambitions. He is neither a villain nor a hero but a rare breed of monarch whose imperfections are well chronicled, anxieties publicly acknowledged, and whose reign, just beginning, carries the weight of being both long overdue and fraught with uncertainty. And as for the next royal in line, she never concerned herself with the future or delayed gratification. Princess Margaret, a fashion icon and rebellious aristocrat, lived as if traditional constraints were mere suggestions, only to express annoyance when reality encroached upon her carefree existence. Born into the world of royalty, Princess Margaret danced through her life as if the monarchy was merely an inconvenience. Donning her title, tiara, and the ceaseless glare of tabloid scrutiny, she eschewed the decorum expected of her. Where Queen Elizabeth II epitomized duty, Margaret was the emblem of rebelliousness, drifting through the sidelines of expectation with a cigarette holder in hand. Sharp-witted, captivating, and fiercely discontented, she embodied a blend of royal grace and nightclub allure, her existence a vivid contrast to the pious expectations of her position. Margaret entered this world in 1930, the younger sister of Queen Elizabeth II, destined only to be a backup to the crown. However, her uncle's unexpected abdication shifted the royal landscape. Her father ascended to the throne, and her sister became the poised heir. From that point on, Margaret's narrative turned into a haunting echo of her sister's path, an existence fraught with privilege yet devoid of real authority. She found herself in the limelight but with no role to play. Her life was a rebellion against the suffocating constraints of her royal identity. With a sharp tongue and an insatiable thirst for life, Margaret spirited flirtations and would often bewildered palace staff. While Elizabeth immersed herself in statecraft, Margaret immersed herself in music and scandal. Her romantic entanglements frequently drew public attention, especially her passionate affair with war hero Peter Townsend, a man marked by a divorced past. Though the public was in favor of their union, the monarchy firmly opposed it. The Church's rules dictated that marrying a divorced man while remaining a working royal was unfathomable. Ultimately, Margaret's broadcasted decision to end her romance felt like a heart-wrenching capitulation to royal protocols, one she claimed was her choice, though few believed her. This pivotal moment shaped her life's trajectory, instilling a sense of betrayal that lingered. She transformed into the glamorous rebel, a traveler, socialite, and provocateur who often exchanged barbs with precision. Once, during a dinner, she quipped to a guest, "We have much in common. You breathe, and I breathe." When asked what her occupation entailed, she simply stated, "I am a member of the British royal family. We are a dying breed." Margaret openly voiced thoughts that others would dare not speak but followed them with even harsher judgments. The marriage that began with promise to photographer Anthony Armstrong-Jones, later known as Lord Snowdon, soon descended into a frigid cohabitation marked by infidelity and headlines of scandal. In her later years, she secluded herself on private islands, smoking through breakfasts and treating royal duties as mere inconveniences. Margaret craved the joys of royalty without its burdens, perhaps perplexed by the intertwining of the two. As time passed, her health and relevance dwindled, and by the 90s, this once glamorous royal was overshadowed by missed opportunities and lingering grievances. Her passing in 2002, mere weeks before her mother, felt poignantly symmetrical, underscoring the relentless overshadowing she had endured. Princess Margaret was not villainous. She simply navigated a royal framework that afforded luxury without true agency, reacting with defiance and indulgence in a gilded cage. Her story serves as a cautionary tale of a keen mind and restless spirit trapped by the golden confines of royalty, symbolizing what occurs when expectations clash with the yearning for freedom. And as Margaret played the role of the rebellious guest at the royal party, the next monarch would embody a colder temperament altogether. A queen unrivaled in brilliance yet tempered by a striking steeliness. Queen Elizabeth II wouldn't merely navigate the treacherous waters of court intrigue. She would commandeer it, meticulously strategizing every alliance and betrayal like a game of chess. Queen Elizabeth I stands as a towering figure in British history, often celebrated as one of its most illustrious monarchs. Known as the Virgin Queen and Gloriana, she presided over an era marked by remarkable achievements in poetry, exploration, and empire building. Portraits of her, with fiery red wigs and a poised hand resting on globes, convey an image of serene authority. However, a deeper look reveals a more complex picture. Behind the iconic visage was a monarch defined by a calculating temperament, emotionally distant when necessary, and an expert at wielding solitude as a weapon. Elizabeth's reign appears less a model of benevolent leadership and more a survivalist strategy cloaked in royalty. Born in 1533 to the controversial union of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth entered the world enveloped in scandal. The execution of her mother cast a long shadow over her youth, and her life oscillated between being labelled illegitimate and then restored to legitimacy. Instead of basking in the security of her royal lineage, she was steeped in paranoia, acutely aware that her royal status was precarious, teetering on the edge of a threat. This pervasive fear influenced her political strategies, demeanor, and interpersonal relationships. Her choice to remain unmarried, proclaiming herself married to her realm, has often been romanticized as a form of devotion to her people. However, a more pragmatic interpretation suggests profound mistrust toward potential alliances. Each suitor posed a danger, one that could usurp her power. Unyielding in her grip on authority, Elizabeth orchestrated her court like a master playwright, drawing courtiers into elaborate displays of loyalty and admiration. Favorites like Robert Dudley were elevated, only to be discarded when they lost their utility or veered from loyalty. Her diplomatic engagements were a dance of calculated rivalry, proposing alliances with France, Austria, and Spain, only to withdraw when circumstances changed. Every refusal felt like a performance, a carefully crafted display. Yet, beneath her distance lay a ruthless edge. The execution of her cousin Mary, Queen of Scots, stands as a stark testament to this duality. Elizabeth grappled publicly with the decision, postponing her signature on the death warrant, yet ultimately sealing Mary's fate, sending a clear message that no bloodline was above her authority. Her responses to uprisings, whether the Northern Rebellion or the insurrections in Ireland, were swift and often brutal. Tolerance extended only as far as it safeguarded her rule, fostering dissent until it threatened her position. Her regal persona, characterized by artful poise and eloquent speeches, was a cultivated illusion. Strategically aware of the potency of symbolism, she crafted an image that would last. As the Spanish Armada approached, she donned armor and delivered a rousing address at Tilbury, proclaiming her weak exterior but steadfast royal heart. Though Elizabeth I ruled for 44 years, she died without a spouse or heir. In her final days, the vibrance of her court waned. Her temperament turned increasingly acute, surrendering to paranoia and isolation. Her reign, while adorned with glory, was steeped in fear and manipulation. Mastering control rather than compassion defined her legacy. In contrast, Mary, Queen of Scots, a rival born of passion and driven by the unwavering belief in the loyalty born of royal blood, charted a different course, one that history would ultimately challenge. Mary, Queen of Scots, was a figure of multifaceted identity, a monarch, a romantic figure, a Catholic, a widow, a mother, and a martyr. Yet, at her core, she was a woman tragically mistaken in believing that her royal birth guaranteed her ability to govern. While her cousin Elizabeth executed power with precision, Mary treated it as a cherished heirloom, ultimately leading to her downfall. Her life isn't merely a tale of fate's cruelty, but an intricate lesson on how charm, a sense of entitlement, and misplaced trust can swiftly lead to destruction. Born in 1542, she ascended to the Scottish throne as an infant of just 6 days. From the outset, she was more a figurehead than a ruler. Educated within the opulent courts of France, she was groomed for diplomatic alliances and marriage rather than the treacherous terrain of 16th-century Scottish politics. Although her French upbringing endowed her with elegance and charm, it also left her ill-prepared for the ruthless dynamics of her native land, where her regal attire and grace meant little against the backdrop of power struggles. Initially married to the frail Francis II of France, she briefly held the title of Queen Consort. However, upon his early death, she returned to Scotland in 1561 as a Catholic monarch in a predominantly Protestant nation. Suddenly, a woman accustomed to European elegance was thrust into a tumultuous environment rife with feuding clans and religious discord. Mary's fundamental miscalculation was her assumption that her queenship equated to authority. Yet, Her return sparked intrigue and rebellion, as factions began plotting the moment she arrived. The inconsistency of her advisors, the opportunism of the nobility, and her own wavering judgment set the stage for her demise. Her first husband, Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, was as charming as he was unstable, and their union quickly soured. His mysterious murder, following violent upheaval, intensified the scrutiny surrounding her. Then came James Hepburn, the Earl of Bothwell, impulsive and brash. Marrying him almost immediately after Darnley's death proved disastrous, fueling public outrage and leading to widespread revolt. Under immense pressure, Mary abdicated in favour of her infant son, James VI, and sought refuge in England with her cousin Elizabeth, marking the beginning of her gradual decline. Elizabeth, ever the strategist, perceived Mary not as family but as a potential pawn for rebellion among Catholic factions, placing her under house arrest for nearly 20 years. Mary's existence became one of constant movement, letter writing, and plotting for freedom that ultimately eluded her. Her involvement in the Babington plot provided Elizabeth with the necessary grounds for her execution in 1587. In death, Mary complicated her own saga. Dressed in red on the scaffold, symbolizing martyrdom, her execution transformed her from a queen who had faltered into a romantic legacy, earning posthumous veneration among Catholics. Debates surrounding her guilt and intentions persist, as historians examine her actions and decisions. The reality is that Mary, though not lacking intelligence, displayed life-threatening recklessness. She assumed her crown would inspire loyalty and that her personal charisma could prevail over political strategy. While Elizabeth's kingdom thrived on skepticism and mistrust, Mary's downfall was rooted in misplaced faith. Two queens, one ascended, the other fell, but neither emerged unscathed. As Mary faced betrayal and poor choices, the next royal, Prince Henry, brother to King Henry VIII, would not even have the chance to make choices of his own. His story serves as a poignant reminder that even those born of royalty may find themselves erased from their lineage. In the annals of royal history, the tales of those who fell into obscurity are often overshadowed, fading into the shadows cast by greater names. Among these forgotten souls lies Prince Henry, the younger brother of King Henry VIII. His existence, though fleeting and largely overlooked, offers a chilling glimpse into the rigidity of the Tudor court, a realm where even family members could be cast aside if they disrupted the grand narrative. To many, the name Prince Henry conjures images of the infamous Henry VIII, the monarch renowned for his 6 wives and tumultuous reign. However, before that king ascended to the throne, there was another Henry, a child born into the royal lineage, the younger sibling of Prince Arthur and son of King Henry VII and Elizabeth of York. Born in 1496, Henry's life was tragically brief. He lingered for only 2 months, long enough to be named but not to leave a mark on the chronicles of Tudor history. His existence was merely a footnote, quickly fading into silence following his passing. The records surrounding Prince Henry are scarce and cryptic, revealing little more than the details of his baptism and a solemn burial at Westminster Abbey. Official accounts attribute his demise to natural causes, a victim of the high infant mortality rates of his time. This quiet disappearance, devoid of scandal or rumor, only deepens the mystery surrounding his life. Amidst a court preoccupied with lineage and the perception of divine right, multiple sons should have signified security. Yet, they instead bred apprehension, as they became potential rivals and risks in a fiercely competitive game of power. Had he survived, Prince Henry might have been relegated to a ceremonial role, a bishopric or a military post meant to keep him at a distance from the core of royal affairs. Alternatively, he could have been dispatched to foreign courts, his legacy confined to treaties and footnotes. Yet, in his untimely passing, Prince Henry unwittingly cleared a path for his older brother Arthur's successor, the future Henry VIII. With Arthur's death in 1502 and Henry's own brief existence, the way was paved for the emergence of a king free from sibling rivalry. The absence of competing heirs solidified Henry's place on the throne. Ironically, the saga of England's most famed monarch unfolded, in part, because the other heirs could not survive, their absence rendering his ascension inevitable. Thus, the poignant tale of Prince Henry lies not in achievements or extravagant stories but rests in what he never had the chance to accomplish. He was a young prince enveloped by the Tudor machinery, a cog that could not find its place, whose brief life was mourned just enough before being obscured by a narrative drawn towards grander, bloodier events. History, ever uneasy with unfinished stories, repurposed each demise into a design of destiny, leading us to yet another royal sibling, Prince Arthur, the elder brother who bore a legacy and a narrative so tenuous that it continues to spark debates about what might have been. Prince Arthur, the elder sibling of Henry VIII, represents one of history's most haunting what-ifs. Born into the Tudor dynasty with great expectations, Prince Arthur was destined for greatness, embodying hopes for a stable future in England. His arrival in 1486, just a year after his father perched upon the throne, signified a new dawn, infused with historical references. He was named after the legendary King Arthur, heralding a royal renaissance. Raised in the Grand Lello Castle, Arthur received an unparalleled education of his time and was lauded for his intelligence, devotion, and demeanor. His strategic marriage to Catherine of Aragon in 1501 was seen as a colossal triumph that fortified England's ties with the powerful Spanish monarchy. However, mere 5 months into this union, tragedy struck. At just 15, Arthur succumbed to an ailment, with the precise cause still a matter of speculation. His untimely demise abruptly shattered his father's meticulously crafted plans for the dynasty. The consequences were immediate and heart-wrenching. Catherine, a widow at 16, found herself alone in a foreign land, while Henry VIII was hastily drawn into a role he was never meant to assume. The ripples of Arthur's death would be felt throughout the centuries. Had Arthur lived, the entire course of English history may have shifted dramatically, potentially averting the tumult of 6 marriages and the subsequent disruption of the Church. Prince Arthur's legacy is one steeped in absence, a crown forever unworn and a fate unfulfilled. His story serves as a poignant reminder of what could have been, setting the stage for a brother whose reign would unfold with volatility and infamy. Arthur's greatest historic contribution may very well be the space he unwittingly created for a king whose path would lead to tremendous upheaval. And as we transition from Arthur, we delve into the darker saga of a ruler who renounced his throne but could never escape the shadows of controversy. Enter the Duke of Windsor, a man now in exile, grappling with the bleak void of boredom and the haunting echoes of his past. In the unfolding saga of royalty, we revisit a figure shrouded in nuanced complexities, the Duke of Windsor, once King Edward VIII. His abdication was a seismic event, like a royal earthquake, shaking the very foundations of the monarchy. The year 1936 is often romanticized, portrayed as a tragic tale of love, as Edward cast aside his crown for the American divorcee, Wallis Simpson. Yet, the narrative demands deeper scrutiny. Beyond the facade lies not merely a deposed monarch but a testament to entitlement in exile, a man who forsook his duties yet remained perplexed when the palace changed the locks. When Edward abdicated for love, he envisioned a life unburdened by royal responsibilities, believing he could enjoy the perks of royalty without its weight. The crown, he thought, had been relinquished in name only. In practice, he felt entitled to remain a key player in royal affairs, a sort of freelance aristocrat without subjects but with considerable influence. The monarchy, however, had other plans. After his abdication, he and Wallis were whisked away to Austria and later, France, receiving the Duke of Windsor title and a lavish allowance, all while being kept at arm's length from royal ceremonies. Wallace was denied any royal status, and they found themselves virtually exiled from significant engagements, leaving Edward sulking and Wallace displaying a strained smile. What followed was an ongoing narrative of grievance, as they made it abundantly clear that they felt victimized by the royal establishment. Edward, never quite able to withdraw from the public eye, dabbled in memoirs, interviews, and magazine photo shoots, feeling torn between the royal image and the ordinary. He ventured into diplomacy, flirted with politics, and perpetually suggested a historical injustice had been dealt to him. Then, a chapter that has not aged well enters the tale. In 1937, Edward and Wallace visited Germany and met none other than Adolf Hitler, offering handshakes and smiles to the Nazi leader. Allegedly, Edward even engaged in full Nazi salutes and expressed admiration for the regime, drawing horrified responses from British intelligence and royal aides. Murmurs suggested that, should the Nazis have invaded Britain, Edward could have been reinstated as a puppet king, a notion discussed even within German intelligence circles. As World War II raged, Winston Churchill dispatched Edward to the Bahamas, a post intended to keep him occupied and out of the limelight. This remote posting, however, did not match Edward's tastes. He lamented the heat, the colonial ambience, and the perceived distance from the elite society he believed he belonged to. Letters drafted in bitterness flowed from him, containing tones of insensitivity, even amid global turmoil. Post-war, Edward and Wallace returned to a life pulsing with a dimmed glamour, filled with Parisian soirees and gatherings alongside aging aristocrats and American luminaries. They became relics, photogenic but distinctly out of step with the world around them. Edward's longing for the crown never waned, and Wallace, despite her glittering jewels and sharp intellect, could not quite shake the disdain heaped upon her by the royal family. Edward passed away in 1972, a man nearly forgotten by the very institution he once ruled. Wallace followed in 1986, interred beside him in a royal crypt, an awkward final act of compromise. The true legacy of Edward VIII transcends the romance. It reveals a slow dissolution of character. Abdication was merely an opening gambit, leading to a life characterized by vanity and self-deceit. As Edward faded into self-imposed obscurity, his next royal counterpart, Prince John of Wales, never even had a chance to push against the confines of privilege. His narrative is brief, stifled, and deeply tragic, an unfortunate boy overshadowed by royal expectations, remembered more as a footnote than a person. It is time to unearth the story of King George vs. Hidden Son, the royal family's most inconvenient secret. In the shadows of a family fixated on reputation, order, and the relentless grip of legacy, there lies the enigmatic figure of Prince John of Wales. Born in 1905, the youngest offspring of King George V and Queen Mary, John was royal by blood but an outsider in function. His siblings, future kings Edward VII and George VI, were embodiments of royal expectations, while John was marked at an early age by a distinct difference rooted in his health. In a world where deviation often dictated silence, his early years showcased a spirited child, frolicking joyously and scaling trees alongside his brothers, clad in crisp sailor suits, embodying the carefree essence of youth. But as he approached the tender age of 5, the carefree laughter faded, replaced by troubling signs. Seizures began to plague him, throwing his behavior into disarray. His inclusion within the highly structured sphere of royal life grew increasingly untenable. While never officially acknowledged, historians now believe John suffered from epilepsy, possibly accompanied by a developmental or neurological disorder, perhaps autism. The early 20th century offered little understanding or compassion for such conditions. Aristocratic society shunned them, and medicine preferred euphemisms, leaving the royal family to grapple with the stigma in heavy silence. By the time he turned 11, Prince John found himself stripped from public engagements, sent to reside in Wood Farm, a secluded spot on the Sandringham estate, where he could be shielded from the prying eyes of the world. His close companions became a nanny, the gardener's daughter, and household staff, a quiet exile born not of cruelty, but of unease. Officially disowned he was not, but discussions about him ceased, a poignant reflection of a family willing to let a child slip into oblivion rather than confront discomfort. John's narrative is not one of disgrace but rather an erasure, a testament to a family so engrossed in projecting an immaculate image that even a child could become a liability if he disrupted their illusion. When he succumbed to a severe seizure at the age of 13 in 1919, his burial was shrouded in silence. His parents mourned in private. No state funeral, no public tributes, just a succinct mention in the court circular, soon overshadowed by royal engagements. Queen Mary expressed that his passing was a tremendous shock, yet to the frail boy, perhaps it was a long-awaited release, a sentiment that rings more like justification than sorrow. Rarely did she visit him, while King George V notably remarked that John was more akin to an animal than a boy. This observation, whether born of insensitivity or the harsh vernacular of a bygone era, casts a long shadow. Prince John's life remains a silent critique of the royal institution that both nurtured and ultimately eroded him. He embodies the reluctance within royalty to acknowledge any form of vulnerability, perpetuating the notion that differences must remain concealed. In recent times, attempts have emerged to resurrect John's story with compassion, recognizing the quiet injustices he faced, albeit belatedly. Royal recognition often arrives after much too long. John lived long enough to be shunned, yet not long enough to draw disdain. He slipped into obscurity, only to become a source of embarrassment for those who preferred to forget. Thus, we reach the conclusion of our exploration, showcasing not just one prince's plight but a tapestry of regal complexities. 25 royals, each marked by their unique flaws, some ludicrously human, others tragically self-involved, and some simply impossible to defend. Together, they paint a complex portrait of monarchy, not as a fairy tale, but as a precarious narrative woven from power, mistakes, and centuries of costly denial.